Welcome back, everybody. We have now finished our discussion of evolution, and evolution plays into more. So even though we're not going to still be talking about the chapter of evolution, we can put so much of what we're still learning and what we've learned already this semester into that context, right? So all life evolved from a common ancestor, and that's why we share the same DNA, the same code. It's decoded in the same way. So much of our cell structures are the same. Through all organisms, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Eukaryotes just have that, have evolved to have a nucleus. And we learned in the very beginning how that may have evolved, right? And then changes over time, how natural selection works, but also other forces of evolution like drift and mutations, which ultimately are the first of all evolution, right? How that variation comes to be. And now we're going to talk about behavior. And as we're talking about it, remember that even though behaviors are something organisms do, and we're mostly talking about animals when we're talking about behavior, um, these are and not things that you can see that like coded in a gene, like your hair color or your eye color or your hair, or I just said hair, but how much of it you have or anything like that. Even though it's not a physical trait, it can still be for changed by evolution. It can be selected upon, and behaviors can be adaptation. So think of that as I'm talking and as we're learning more, and I'm going to have you, try to think through some of that. Just like when we talked about the foxes at the end of the last chapter, right? That was the fox behaviors of being more domestic. That was what was being selected for. So let's get into it. This isn't a chapter in your book. I've just called it behavior because your book doesn't have this chapter, but I think it is so interesting and often really gets people, excited about biology when you start thinking about what animals do and their behaviors. So let's pull this up and get started. Get your notes ready. Okay, so we start off with just this picture of wolves, and I call it evolution and behavior because, as I said, behaviors can evolve and can be selected for. So just think for a moment about like some of the behaviors that you might see just in this picture, and possibly what what those could have been selected for, right? How are those adaptive? When you think about wolves, just the fact that they're in a pack, right? This is a behavior. They live together. They're social animals. Some animals are solitary. They obviously do better in a pack. It's protective, but it also is very good for them to find food. They hunt together, right? So they're more successful together than they are alone. And so that behavior has been selected for individuals that chose to be with others and that cooperated with others, got more food, survived longer, passed on more genes, reproduced more. So for wolves, that social behavior has been selected. Okay, so the topics that we're going to cover are just the fact that behaviors do evolve, talk about altruism, and then in other lectures, sexual conflict and communication as well. So as I said, behaviors are adaptive, right? So they're often founded on genes. And so anything that there's a variation among individuals in, if it's genetically based and can be inherited, um, those behaviors can be selected for, and they can become adaptations that can maximize fitness. So some maybe food preferences among organisms, right? We like sugars and fats, right? French fries or ice cream, most people love those, and there's a reason, right? You get the most calories for the least amount of effort for that. So there's firing little areas of your brain that make you happy and make you want more. That's an adaptation to make you seek out those foods. If you're lucky enough to find something fatty or sugary, you should keep eating it because you don't know if, tomorrow maybe there's no food. Um, Cooperation and alliance building, that pack behavior of wolves. And in humans, we tend to, work in tribes and, in groups of people. These have evolved to increase fitness. Some organisms are more aggressive and they're territorial. For them, those protect their interests, right? They need a lot of space in order to get enough resources, and so they will defend that space. Um, and also breeding and parental behavior, those maximize offspring survival. Should the parents focus on one offspring for a long amount of time, right, and maximize their fitness through that one or two offspring, or should they have 100 offspring and hope that two survive, right? Different organisms, for different organisms, there are different answers, but you can assume that where they are is at a maximal point, right, that optimized their fitness. And so different answers for different organisms. Any behavior that meets those criteria of natural selection that we talked about can be shaped by natural selection. So let's go through again, what are Darwin's four postulates? Let me get a blank slide for you here. Right, so those four postulates, in order for something to be shaped by natural selection, the first thing is you need variation. So if we're talking about parental behavior, it could be, having your baby, maybe laying an egg and then leaving, or staying and defending it and then caring for the young, right? So there could be a variation in those. Okay, that variation is heritable. So if you had a mom that defended the egg, you will stay around to defend the egg, and if you had a mom that just left, then you would get that gene and you would just lay eggs and leave. Okay. There is a variation so there's a variation. The first variation that I have here is in a behavior. Okay. And this other one is there is some I should say variability in survivorship and in reproductive success. So not everybody has the same number of offspring. Not everybody has the same number of offspring survive to then pass on their genes as well. And that variability is not random. So if we're talking about a bird, right? The birds that lay the eggs and left, their eggs got cold, the babies died, or they were defenseless against a predator. Those parents had very little success. The parents that stayed behind, defended the nest, and then fed their offspring until they were old enough to fledge and fly away, those were successful. Their offspring survived and passed on those genes. So those are the traits that are then in the next generation. And you could apply these four postulates to any behavior or any other trait. Some traits don't have variation and some are not heritable, but the ones that are can be shaped by natural selection. So let's go back to our lecture here. Okay, so if we look at this, these pictures, you can see there are potential different adaptive behaviors here. So that's actually going to be your question. So think about, what are the costs and benefits of these behaviors? So I'm not going to give you an answer here, but I want you to think about that. All right. When we're talking about behaviors, as you know, some behaviors are instincts. You don't control them. Those are innate. You're born with them. They're hardwired. They don't really vary between individuals, but they've been selected for. They're still advantageous. So everybody does it the same way. So, little tweaks in that behavior may not can't be selected for. We can't change the way we do things. We do some of our instincts, but it's still that instinct is there for a reason. So if we think of when you fall, you immediately put your hands out, right? Everybody is going to throw their hands out in the same way. You can't like work on making it different or better, right? But that's just an instinct that you're going to put your hands out. If something comes towards your eye, you're going to blink. Babies, if anybody in the class has spent some time with a newborn, if you put your finger, a finger in their palm, they're going to close their palm around to grasp it. That's an instinct, right? So these are things that don't really vary between individuals. Everybody does them. There are some instincts that are actually a little bit more complex because there's a whole pattern of like things that you do once there's a stimulus. So those are called fixed action patterns. It's still an instinct, but it's not just a quick like put your hands out, but it's a more of a a whole like rigmarole that an animal will go through. It doesn't require any learning, but it's something that once you start doing it, you can't stop. It's kind of like an OCD behavior. And a great example of that is egg retrieval in geese. So if an egg rolls out of a nest, a goose will go to pull it back in. But she's going to do if somebody that takes the egg away, the goose is still going to complete that behavior and keep trying to tuck the egg under her, even if there's no egg there. So once it's begun, she can't just stop and be like, wait, my egg disappeared and look around for the egg. She's going to keep doing the behavior. So let me show you that. I'm going to pull up a video to show you guys. Oh, sorry. It's gonna going through an ad for a sec. Okay. Let me pull this up for you now. Okay, so this is a fixed action pattern that we're going to be looking at. Look, it's just a black and white video. I want you to see the goose rolling the egg into her nest, and then the researcher will take the egg away, and she'll continue rolling when she thinks there's an egg there. So they go through the same thing a few times. Okay, so that is just a quick video showing that fixed action pattern that, once you begin the motion, you have to finish it. It's an instinct. You can't just stop partway through. Let's go back in here. Okay, the kind of the opposite of these fixed action patterns is a learned behavior. And there's a range of behaviors, right? It's not just instinct or learned, because there are different types of learning as well. But learned behaviors are things that we can acquire, right? You're not born knowing them or how to do them, and it can change based on the environment or your past experiences. You can get better at them or change how you do them, whether it's better or worse. Some things are easily learned and some things are harder to learn. So things that are easy to learn may already have like a pathway, some neurons already like formed that path, and you just need to fire it off once. So a great example of that is like a fear of snakes. The first time a primate sees a snake, it doesn't know to be afraid of it, right? It's just like, oh, look, there's something slithering on the ground. They might be curious about it. But if another individual starts to shriek or alarms or pulls them back, they will learn that fear very quickly. This is called prepared learning. There's already, you can, and this has been shaped by evolution. An individual who quickly learned to fear snakes would avoid them for the rest of their lives and do better. An individual who like never figured it out might get bitten by a snake and die. So there's an advantage, right? There could be variation in that trait, and that's heritable. And not everybody passes on the same number of genes, and it's not random. The ones who avoid the snakes pass on more genes. So you can see that that could become a hardwired thing that you could learn very quickly. There's some things that are harder to learn, right? Calculus. But if we even think for humans like speaking, babies learn that pretty quickly, right? So by age 1 to 1.5, babies can have a lot of words. They can even be putting together sentences. And if you think of all the other things that a 1.5-year-old can't do, right? They're not great at running. They're just learning to climb. They can't clothe themselves. They can't ride bikes. They really can't do much, but they can communicate, because that's obviously that is a prepared learning. Our brains have wired, and depending on where you're born and who you're surrounded by, you can learn different languages and totally different ways of speaking and different accents, right? And you could take a newborn who was born anywhere and plop them down anywhere, and they can learn the language of where they are growing up. So these complex behaviors don't necessarily involve complex thought, right? Being able to put together a well-structured sentence doesn't require a lot of thought. It can just, you are prepared, your brain can do that. So any action that maximizes reproductive success in the long term, right? A baby isn't thinking about reproductive success, but it gives them that ability to communicate, to survive so that they one day will, right? Um, that can be selected for. So anything that gives some positive feedback, you're likely to repeat that. So that egg retrieval in geese gives that goose some sense of accomplishment, presumably. But like we are happy when we have sugary or fatty foods that dings in our brain. That gives us success, right? So we're going to hunt that down more. Organisms that seek mating opportunities at the right time of season or during mating season, they're going to seek that out. Because that maximizes their success. So they're not thinking it through like I need to have more offspring in order to pass on my genes, but they know that that like dings a happy center in their brain, so they're going to go do that. Now, we talked a little bit about cooperation, but there's something else that's different from cooperation called altruism. And altruism is a behavior that benefits the recipient but comes at a cost to the donor. So this is different from cooperation. When we're talking about wolves in a pack working together, they all get food from that. That helps everybody. But altruism would be if we were all actually face to face in class and somebody forgot their lunch and I said, I have a sandwich, I don't need it. I had breakfast already. I'm not that hungry. You take my sandwich. That's a cost to me. I'm not going to get to eat lunch today, but you need it more, right? So altruism is giving of oneself without getting something in return. But shouldn't natural selection produce selfish behavior? Right? Shouldn't we only want to do well for ourselves so that we can pass along our genes? Why would an organism ever help another organism? Think about that for a minute. And it's not for the good of the species. Nobody cares if their species survives. They want to survive, right? They want to have their own offspring. They don't care if somebody else's kids survive, right? No organism, no animal is doing this for the good of the species or to better everybody else, right? Because if you think about that, if there's someone who is unselfish and says, I just want everybody else to do well, and they have that, I want to help everybody gene, but they don't have any offspring, then that gene doesn't get passed on. The individuals who are selfish and we're like, sure, I'll take your help, I'll take the food, right? The selfish individuals are the ones who pass on the genes. So altruism, there is a reason that this can evolve. And the reason is that virtually all altruism involves kin. It's costing you, but it's benefiting your relatives. So in most animals, but not all, it is, okay, I'll give you my sandwich, but it's because I'm related to you, right? I'm not going to give my sandwich to a complete random stranger. Humans sometimes do, right? We do give food to people we don't know, but most animals won't. The other type of altruism is reciprocal altruism. You're helping someone who's not related, but it's somebody who will hopefully help you in the future. So if we think about, let's say you went out for coffee with some friends and someone forgot their money. You say, okay, you know what? I'll treat you this time. I'll give you some money for coffee. And you assume that, the next time you go out, they say, hey, I'll treat you, right? Or they'll give you your few bucks back. But what if every time you went out to coffee with your friends, the same friend always forgot their money? Eventually, you're going to say, no, I'm not going to keep giving you money, right? You know who that individual is. You can recognize individuals and you can recognize someone who doesn't pay back and you will stop paying them, right? So reciprocal altruism assumes that you can recognize individuals and you're going to get payback. And we can test this. So let's look at some examples. So for kin selection, there's a squirrel that is heavily predated by birds, right? So these guys are kind of like prairie dogs. They live in the ground and they come up, and some of them act as watches, and so they're looking out for eagles overhead or hawks. And when they see one, they make a call. They tell everyone like duck for cover, save yourself. But the individuals that make that call have a 50% chance of being killed. So why would any of them make it? Right? That's a huge risk. And they found out that the vast majority of the calls are made by older females. So all of their sisters are in that group, and their own offspring, and their nieces and their nephews and their cousins. So they're benefiting, right? It's females who've already reproduced. They've passed on their genes, and they want their genes to survive. And they want their genes to survive because there's this concept of inclusive fitness. It's your own fitness, which is, in the evolutionary sense, how many genes have you passed on, plus the fitness of your kin that you've helped. So individuals that maximize the fitness of their kin will have a greater inclusive fitness than individuals that are just like, they're on their own, I'm in it for me. If you do that, and all of your nieces and nephews and maybe your children die, then you didn't actually accomplish anything. You did not pass on any genes. Now, there are some animals that take this to an extreme. And these are called eusocial animals. So U is true. So they're truly social. These are the animals that live in big colonies where only a very small number of individuals reproduce and everybody else does the work. So I'm sure you guys have seen examples of this, right? So bees have a queen, and you can see she's so much bigger than everyone else. She's the only reproducing one. This is a termite queen, an ant queen. I mean, look how much bigger she is, right? So these are in usually insects. Some, not all insects, but most examples of eusocial organisms are insects. And then for mammals, there is the naked mole rat, and they are at the National Zoo. There's a really cool colony of them if you go to the small mammal house. But here's the naked mole rat mom. And in these organisms, there's a female queen who is the only one who reproduces. The other females do all the work. So they tend to the babies, and they get all of the food, and they defend the hive or the nest. And the males do really nothing, especially for the insects. They mate with a queen, and then they die. They do no work, and they really are just kind of a drain on the society. But the question is, how could this system evolve, right? Why, if your inclusive fitness is your fitness plus the fitness of your offspring, and your relatives, right? Why would the system evolve where some individuals have no chance of reproducing, right? They don't have their own offspring. Why would they help the colony? Why don't they go off on their own? And the answer is, if you remember when we talked about how sex is determined in some insects, for these eusocial insects, not for the mammals, because for mammals the sex isn't wise and it's more complicated, but for these insects, if you recall, the females are diploid, which means they have a set of chromosomes from their mom and a set of chromosomes from their dad. The males are haploid, which means they have a set of chromosomes only from their mom. They come from unfertilized eggs. So if you have the same dad, you didn't get half of your genes the same from, if he's only giving half, you can assume you didn't get all the exact same genes from as your siblings. That's why you're not identical to your siblings, right? You might have gotten some different genes from your dad than your sibling did, or different genes from your mom. But for these insects, the genes that their dad gave for the females are all the same. Dad doesn't have two sets of genes. He doesn't have two chromosome 1s and two chromosome 2s. He only has one. So you got the same one. So what this means is that sisters, because of that, are actually more closely related to one another than they would be to their own offspring. Sisters are 75% related. They share 75% of their genes. I didn't even have that here. Brothers are 50% related to one another because they have half of their mom's genes. They either have some of the same ones as one another or different ones. Because the brothers only have the mom's genes, they're only 25% related to their sisters. But the sisters are 50% related to their brothers. But they're 75% related to each other. It's all very complicated. I'm not going to ask you the numbers. But the idea is that they're so closely related to each other, it's better to save your sister than to have your own offspring, because your sister's more closely related to you than your own children would be. So that is how this kind of weird system could evolve. And then the other example of when an organism would help another one is when we think about reciprocal altruism. So that is helping someone who's not related to you. And it's rarer. There aren't that many animals that do this, but it can evolve. It evolves if individuals repeatedly interact with each other. And so you are the donor sometimes, but sometimes you're the recipient, and they'll help you back. If the benefit to the recipient is significantly greater than the cost to you, right? You're not going to give out your lunch all the time just because someone's like, yeah, my breakfast wasn't that big. But if they're starving, if a friend is truly starving, you will give them your sandwich, right? And you have that ability to recognize cheaters. If every single day they say they forgot to eat breakfast, you'll be like, you know what? I'm done. I'm not going to give you my lunch every day. But if sometimes you forget and they give you theirs, right? If it's reciprocal and you punish the cheaters, but most people help each other, this will evolve. And so the animal that it is that is a great example because it's not that common is the vampire bat. So I'm gonna this is the kind of the end of this lecture, but I'm just gonna end with this video of I just have to find it though, of the vampire bats. So let me pull that up for you. Okay, thank you for waiting. Just trying to get that file open, and then I've got to share it. Okay, so David Attenborough is going to talk us through now.
Arguments and squabbles between adult animals striving to maintain their position within their community are common enough. But acts of assistance in which one adult animal goes to the aid of another that's got itself into difficulties, these are much rarer. But this sort of behavior does seem to occur regularly in one species of animal, a colony of which is living in this hollow tree. It's not an animal that might immediately come to mind as an example of a caring, unselfish creature. But that apparently is what it is. On this pile of droppings, there are flecks of congealed blood, characteristic sign of vampire bats. And the colony itself is roosting above me. These bats, all females, habitually roost as a group. If they move elsewhere, they will stick together and hang in the same sort of arrangement. Most are related, although by no means all. But every bat knows her regular companions well. At night, they fly off to look for blood. A donkey is a favorite target. One lands on its shoulder and shaves a slice of skin without the donkey even noticing. Another goes for its ear. The bat's saliva contains an ingredient that prevents blood from clotting, and it flows freely from the wound they make. A third bat tries a different point of attack. The bat on the ground still hasn't got a hold, but it's very hungry and it makes one last attempt. But no, she won't feed tonight. On returning to the roost, she hangs up beside an old friend. She turns to her neighbor and licks her face repeatedly, begging for food. If she goes hungry for more than a day or two, she will die. But her friend regurgitates enough life-giving blood to keep her going until the following day. On another night, the situation may be reversed, and the bat that is receiving now will repay the gift if it's needed. But cheats, bats that refuse to give to a neighbor who once helped them, will quickly be detected, and in consequence may never be helped again. So for a vampire, it pays to help your neighbors, whether they're related or not. Look after them, and they will look after you.
Okay, so that is it for this section of the lecture. So go in, answer your discussion question, and I'll see you in the next one. Trying to stop the recording though. Here we go. Bye.